Starting. I'm going to pause the recording. Hi, everyone. There's going to be a pause. All right, we're recording. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Game Academy's panel using role-playing games to learn and teach history. Welcome, everyone. We are waiting for one more person to join in. We're having some tech issues, not surprising. We're waiting on Mike Mason, but we wanted to get started. Anyways, so real quick, we have Andrew Peterson and Jason Morningstar with us. Thank you very much for joining us. And Mike is going to chime in at some point. So I want to thank the Game Academy for letting us do this panel and welcome everyone to our Game Academy's fundraiser, online fundraiser. The Game Academy is a 501c3 nonprofit that uses role-playing games for education. We encourage you to check out our website and all the things we're doing at thegameacademy.org. We are doing a whole bunch of great programming today. So check thegameacademy.org/fundraiser. There's a schedule there. There's games going on. There's other panels. We got a show. It's amazing. Please check it out. Stay with us and help us out. We can use donations. Is tax deductible. It's 501c3. We encourage people to donate to help us get scholarships for kids to attend our amazing gaming programs. So with that, let's do some introductions. Andrew, you're first on my screen. Can you please introduce yourself to our viewers?
Sure. Andrew Peterson. I'm officially the Instructional Technology Coordinator at Ferris State University, which sounds a little bit more boring than it is. But basically, they let me run a game-based learning institute there, where I help faculty introduce game and game-like elements into their classroom, which was the kind of the segue into using role-playing games, board games, video games in a wide array of classroom environments.
Cool. Thank you. And Jason Morningstar.
Hey, I'm Jason. I am the creative director at Bully Pulpit Games, which is a small company that makes tabletop and live action role-playing games. I also consult around designed playfulness and teaching and learning, both in academia and in industry.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. And we'll get started. Mike is rebooting, but we'll get started on this. So we want to talk about history, which is a huge topic, and it's extremely interesting. And but it could be very daunting for some people as a topic to approach. So why would we even approach something like? Why would we use history in a game? What's the benefits of using history? And Jason, I'm gonna start with you and then go to Andrew.
Sure. Thanks. Well, I think history is full of very important lessons for everybody, but it also is sort of a palette to draw from, right? So if there's a particular topic or a particular theme that you are interested in exploring or need to explore because it supports your pedagogy in some way, then it almost certainly exists in history. You can find an example of that, and that can tie multiple things together in ways that are very compelling. That's certainly been my experience. So if you want, you can create out of whole cloth an imaginary world where certain things are in opposition or concordance, or you can look to history and find the same thing. And I personally find that much more compelling because it's drawn from lived experience, and I think that's really exciting and powerful.
Awesome. Andrew, why should we be using history in our games?
So for me, history in the classroom was always names and dates of old dead white guys. I heard it described once like that, and I'm like, that's really, ouch, accurate. And you'd learn the who and you would learn the when, but you wouldn't necessarily learn the why. And
Welcome,
so there was
Mike. Sorry to interrupt. Mike's coming in, but keep going, Andrew, and Mike will introduce you. Welcome, Mike, keep going, Andrew.
And so history was always kind of just this thing to memorize. And in school, that was really kind of a sad point for me because I never really got into history until much later in life because I was like, this is a multiple choice test. This isn't something with experience, or that wasn't people's lives. This was just a timeline to memorize. And like I said, as soon as I experienced history through play, I was like, oh, there's motivating factors and there's nuances, and it didn't have to be this way. Here was this one pivotal moment that, a good speech over here might have persuaded this person, and, kind of the whole butterfly effect. And so, like I said, the play of history really kind of broadened it for me from something that was pre-scripted, had to happen, was going to go that way, memorize it, regurgitate it, and get your A or C and be happy. And so it livened it up.
Thank you. I'm hitting the mute. So thank you guys. So Mike Mason, welcome. Glad we got you in.
For being late.
No problem. We just get started. So Mike, why don't you do a quick introduction of yourself? And then I just approached our first question, which is, why would we use history in games? So an intro, and then why should we even use history in games? Thanks, Mike.
Okay. Hi, I'm Mike Mason. I'm the creative director at Chaosium for the Call of Cthulhu line. Basically I either edit, write, manage the whole kind of Cthulhu line and development of the books and games that we put out. Why would we use history in a game? Well, I mean, Call of Cthulhu is basically an historical role-playing game to some degree, as in that its most kind of played and favored kind of setting is 1920s, 1930s era. So players play in a kind of historical epoch, and so I guess in a sense it grounds certain games in a familiar milieu that players can maybe more easily get into without having to learn a completely new fictional world in that sense. So there's an ease of understanding the game world by playing in history, and also it's exciting and interesting. History is full of history and interesting things, and they make for good things to explore in role-playing games.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So letting everyone know, attendees, that we'll be taking Q&A at the end of this. You can type your questions either into Zoom if you're in here on Zoom, or on Twitch, and we'll get to those at the end. If you don't understand something, if something's confusing, then go ahead and type the question. But otherwise, if you can hold your questions to the end, that would be great. So my next question, panelists, is how can players learn history? How can we use role-playing games as a pedagogical tool? Because it seems really difficult, I guess. I'm kind of being devil's advocate here, because you have to kind of learn all this stuff before you can play, right? You have to memorize all these things and the background and the context and the players before you can play. Isn't that right? And so how can people learn through this? And Andrew, I'm going to start with you with reacting to the past. And if you want to kind of explain a little bit what the reacting to the past is, and then I'll go to Mike and then Jason.
So reacting to the past is a series of role-playing games that have various historical context. They're very well written out, documented, and kind of they're written for the non-gamer instructor, so that you can be able to pick it up, have your students play it, and kind of engage with the intellectual debates of the time. And what I like about it is you have to know your place or your character's place in history, but you're going to discover other players and their perception of history and their kind of motivating factors just through play. So when I'm talking with you about something that's passionate to my character, you might look at me and be like, "You're stupid." And then I'm like, "Well, wait a minute. I thought everybody did that because that's how history went." And you go, "Why are there discrepancies?" And so it's kind of the discovery of the knowledge is built into the play. And that's one of those critical elements, because you're not going to fill a room with PhDs in history just to play the history game. You're going to fill a classroom with students. And so you have to have that scaling learning environment that's going to allow them to kind of come along for the ride, and gain some valuable information out of it. It's not just going to be a PowerPoint lecture. It's going to be something that they're going to kind of discover.
Yeah, that process of discovery, I think, is really amazing, that it's intrinsically motivated, which is what we're really big with the Game Academy. So Mike, for non-students, I learned a lot from history playing Call of Cthulhu, one of my games. I mean, it drove me to the literature, which drove me to, fleshing out the scenarios by doing historical research that just became interesting of the 1920s and 1930s. So how can, I guess, inadvertently people be learning history through a not specifically educational game?
I think there's two ways, and I think this obviously goes for any role-playing game to some degree that uses an historical backdrop to some degree. Certainly in Call of Cthulhu, there's two means to it, really. There's the direct route, where you may be maybe the GM, the games master of the game, so therefore you're picking up scenarios and setting materials that are describing a particular location, situation in history, period of history. So for instance, with Call of Cthulhu, you might want to play in the Wild West. So you pick up our Down Darker Trails book, which is all about, playing games in the American Old West. And so within that book, there is, there's a whole chapter on history, which is just factual history, as in this is what's going on. These are the big kind of political and historical factors that were happening, through, pre the arrival of European settlers through to the end of the American Civil War. So it's a big chunk of history. And again, we don't go into massive depth in it. Obviously, we can't. It's not a history book, but there is a great overview, and it provides you that kind of information. So as a keeper, a games master, you're taking that information in to kind of build your model of this historical setting that you want to represent in your games. And then there's the kind of softer approach, which obviously as a player, your GM is imparting this information through play. So as you play through the game, not only are you encountering dramatic situations and a mystery and something you need to kind of solve and overcome a challenge, but you're doing it in an historical bubble, effectively. And so in doing that, you get to learn, that in the 1920s, there are telephones and there is electricity, but telephones work a little differently to how they work now, and there's no mobile phones and all that kind of thing. So you kind of, through osmosis, kind of take that in and effectively learn stuff without really knowing you're learning it, really, as you develop your characters. And of course, you can be inspired as you roll up a character and you want to be a doctor in the 1920s or in the Old West or some kind of herbalist in the Dark Ages. You may be inspired to go and do a bit of extra research yourself, even if it's only looking on Wikipedia or whatever. But you then go and engage in some historical research. So the learning process, it's kind of continuous in a sense in that way, and that it's not particularly burdensome. It's a pace and a level that you want to explore that, which could be from nothing to really getting into it and going and buying and looking online, historical texts and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jason, you might have an answer for this, but I'm actually kind of curious in that card game we played, and I'm sorry I'm forgetting about it, that was on the the groups from the 60s, the one that was at USC. If you want to talk about how players can learn things, kind of uncover things they're exposed.
Sure, you're talking about Winterhorn.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
I'm happy to talk about that as an example of play as an opportunity for learning, but I just wanted to mention a couple of things that were said and put them in context. First of all, I learned everything I know about mortgages and the stock market playing Traveler as a kid. So a highly motivated participant, somebody who's highly engaged and wants to learn, like applied kinematics, right? I learned how planetary motion works playing Traveller. So as a precocious youngster, all of these games become a smorgasbord from which to learn if you're excited about things. Probably bullet ballistics too. I probably learned a lot about that as a kid because I was interested in, because it was part of the games I was playing. So like the idea that we're creating scaling learning environments that promote discovery, which were points that Andrew made, it's opening a door that the engaged learner can walk through if they want to. And as a designer, my goal is to encourage that, but also to provide everything that you need to have a complete experience by presenting the material in a way that's easy to understand and that's limited to what you need to participate in the activity. And that if you need more than that, it's available, but it's not essential. And there are ways that you can do that I'm sure Mike and I could talk about. You mentioned my game Winterhorn, which is it's sort of a live action game. There's also a classroom mode for it that is about how governments and authorities degrade and destroy activist groups. And you learn about those harmful techniques by taking on the role of government agents tasked with destroying an activist group. And so it's designed for people to interrogate their own activism and harden it against these techniques, which like you as an activist you might be very well aware of, but maybe not. Maybe you've never heard of bad jacketing, and once you know about it, you can look at your organization and say, are we vulnerable to this? And so it's a game. It has a very specific goal, and that goal is achieved through play, which I think is really what we're all talking about.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So our next question, actually Lily asked a question, but this leads into what our next question is. So Lily, we are answering this on the next one. So are there particular events in history that you have used or feel that are especially interesting to explore in role-playing games? And so my question, I'll start with Mike and then go Jason and Andrew. So pick one, basically pick one of your examples of something that you worked on that really inspired you. So something that was a game or a supplement that was historical that you inspired and learned from. And hopefully, Lily, that's the answer to your question. So we'll go Mike, Jason, and then Andrew. Thanks.
I mean, to be honest, every time, like a lot of different freelancers writing different books for Call of Cthulhu. It's a big range with many different kind of historical periods and settings to play in. So when something a new setting comes along, for instance, like the book we recently did on Berlin in the Weimar Republic during the 1920s. Now, I already knew quite a bit about the Weimar Republic because I, for my sins, have studied history in the past and so forth. But so I knew a little bit about the Weimar Republic and felt fairly informed. But editing that book written by David Larkins, who had obviously done a tremendous amount of research on that period, I was learning many more things than I was aware of about the society and about because obviously when you tend to study those kind of periods in history, particularly the Germany in the 1920s, it's inevitable it becomes focused upon the rise of the Nazi Party and so forth, because obviously that spells everything that happens thereafter in the 1930s and 40s. But what was interesting that David had drawn out a lot of detail about many other political organizations and social groups, that beyond, not connected with the Nazis, but, other kind of political faction and fighting that was going on, which was immensely interesting because many of them are very bizarre and very kind of extreme. And in a sense, are far more interesting in some ways than the kind of general history we already know. So yeah, I mean, I always learn something when I'm working on a book in that way, and certainly the Berlin book is a prime example of that kind of learning for me. And I'm sure people that pick it up have commented back to me that there's a lot in there that they just never realised, and how it was a fantastic setting for playing games because of the whole kind of what was going on in Berlin at the time, the whole cultural scene, the whole stratas of society that were, you know, just amazing, really, what was happening there. You know, putting aside all the politics, but just what was happening in terms of the nightlife and the different kind of social cultures and so forth. And yeah, fascinating.
Yeah. And Berlin book is quite amazing. If you guys get to pick it up, if anyone does, that's what's the Berlin? What's the Wicked City?
Berlin, Wicked City.
Yeah. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, for me, the game that I would that resonates most strongly with me is my game Night Witches, which is a game about the 508th Night Bomber Regiment, which was a Soviet formation during World War II that was composed entirely of women. And so the thing that really drew me to the project was reading about them. And I read some sort of secondary sources, interviews with the actual women who participated. And I realized that there was a way to both expose people to this extraordinary story, but also make it, bring it to life and allow people to embody these really remarkable women in a way that wasn't telling the war story that we've told many times before. So here you have this intersection of total war and endemic sexism, and that's a really interesting place to sort of position play, because in some ways, like it says on the tin, that you're going to be bombing Nazis, and everybody loves to do that. So it can bring people in with the promise of that, and that promise is amply delivered. But you also get to experience what these women endured just so that they could do their jobs, which I think is a very contemporary and resonant theme for play. So that'd be the example that I'd give.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. Andrew.
Latest one that I can think of off the top of my head was playing one of the Reacting to the Past games called Mexican Revolution. So I will fully admit that I had little to no knowledge of the timeline, the scale, and kind of working with the author of that. We actually played it during the virtual Gen Con this year. And so we brought in kind of a bunch of people, gave out their different roles, and really learned about kind of land reform and kind of the political environment of Mexico during the revolutionary times, or Mexicans revolutionary times. So it was just kind of through that experience of play. And like I said, it's one of those things that you go, had no knowledge of it kind of going into it. You know, it's not like I'm the expert in it. It's not like it's something that I've researched, I'm passionate about. It's just one of those things that I'm like, here's the environment that I'm going to be playing in. I should look up a little bit about it. Here's the character. What's a Zapatista? There's things that, like, I've found that with my connection to the Reacting to the Past, I have like these insanely deep pockets of knowledge of history that I have no right to have. I'm your typical kind of geeky, nerdy person. I know stuff about like FTP servers and networking and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden I'll be like, oh yeah, the history of music and John Cage. And it'll be like, wait, what? Why is that a thing that you know about? And you're like, oh, there was a game that I had to argue with him about why silence isn't music. And you go, oh, okay. So it really, it's, kind of going back to the actual question. I like all the areas. I mean, if you gamify almost anything, it makes it fun because it's play. And of course you want to learn about the environment that you're playing in. So, I mean, to me, it seems like kind of stating the obvious that I like to learn about what I'm playing.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a little chat going here that I'll just state for those of you on Twitch and not seeing the Zoom chat. Lily's saying Night Witches were awesome, which they were. They flew World War I vintage planes in World War II. And Jason said they did indeed. So 1920s era PO2 biplanes. So you have basically these women flying these, 15, 20-year-old planes in World War II. Night Witch is an amazing game, by the way. I would leave to go get my copy and show it, but okay, I'm getting stuff from from you, Josh, which we'll handle later. So we'll put these links in there. What I was going to add, what I think is amazing on history, because I love using history too when I'm making games, and as I dig into stuff, what I love finding in history that just keeps coming up over and over again, and is in all the things that you guys mentioned, is just the humanness, the humanity, the conditions that people had to go through, that are going through now, so that even though this is something that happened decades or hundreds of years in the past, it's still relevant to me, which at least to me, and that in a game it becomes dramatic. There's conflict, there's situations that you want to play through and see how it is. And so I love looking at the past and hearing about I did a Call of Cthulhu adventure on the twilight sleep, which was how women it was a new way of giving childbirth, and that whole there was a whole interesting thing about that, and just how that relates to pregnancy, how women are treated with pregnancy today. So I love the humanity that's in all of this, and so as a player, as a designer, as a game master, and I'm sure you guys all follow that as well, that even though you're looking in the past that had way long ago, that there's still amazing stories that you want to play in, so yes, and kind of gets into my next question, which could be really big. This could be a really big one, which is how you design or make a game that's using history instead of fiction, creating it. So what's your process? So this is specifically to you in designing something. How do you go about it? What's your approach? And I'm going to go Jason, Mike, Andrew. So Jason, Mike, Andrew, how do you design a historical game?
That's such a huge question.
It is.
So I think the first thing that I think about when I'm approaching a historical topic is to try to understand the framework in which I'm operating and in which the information I have available, it presents itself, because we know who wrote it, but we don't know whose stories maybe aren't documented. And so that's something I'm always thinking about. If it's even remotely contemporary, I am sensitive to the fact that it's somebody's lived experience, and that someday I might meet somebody who I have to defend my work to. And that's happened to me. I had a conversation at the Warsaw Uprising Museum with a curator who had read my game Gray Ranks, which is about child soldiers in the Warsaw Uprising. So the fact that I'd written it with sort of centered on that possibility made it much easier for me to defend my work, because I knew that the work I'd done was good, and that I was representing things in the best way that I could. But I learned a lot from that interaction too. So like, sort of centering the work appropriately is really important to me. And then I think about how I'm going to communicate the things that are important and how that information is going to be chunked, right? Because you could write a massive monograph about the Great Blizzard of 1888, if that's what your game's about. But what a person engaging with the fiction needs to know just to have a good time is some extreme subset of that. And what somebody needs to know to really breathe life into it or give it some nuance and clarity is a little bigger subset of that, but it's still not the huge corpus of information that's available. So like I have to think about what that information is and how to present it in a way that's playable, that's going to be engaging, and that provides sort of off ramps to learn more as desired or as necessary. So like it's a series of structural challenges for me, I think, and that's the way that I would frame it in the briefest of terms. I could talk about this all day, but that's
this is a huge one. I'm curious, real quick, and then we'll go to Mike. How long do you spend? Like, what's your time frame? And this will be the same question to all of you. So when you are, what kind of time frame is it, and is there a condition where once you decided that you think the information, what's the condition that like, okay, we're ready to start implementing this?
So for me, you never get it all right, and you never know everything. You miss cool stuff that you learn later. You make mistakes in your research. That's just a kind of a given. try to avoid those things, but it totally happens. For the example of that game Gray Ranks that I mentioned, I made errors in translation. So polls were like, hey, you got the name of this thing wrong sometimes. So that's embarrassing, but it's correctable and understandable. In terms of doneness, like that's hard to quantify. You're never done with a game design. You just have to stop working on it. And for me, there are certain procedural benchmarks where that makes sense. If the game works well without me in the box with it, that's a good sign. Then there's some other like internal benchmarks that tell me that it's good enough. It's where it needs to be, and I need to let it go because I could refine it forever, and that's not productive for anybody. But I don't know exactly how to say I'm done with this. Everything that I could possibly say about it is ready to be said.
Yeah, great. Mike, how are you? How are you approaching these games?
I think number one, I kind of have to convince myself or be convinced that this is an appropriate milieu for the game I'm doing, which obviously is most of the time is Call of Cthulhu. So does it make sense? Does it fit the basis of the game? What the game is fundamentally about. And if it does that, it seems to me like this is a great backdrop to the machinations of the Cthulhu mythos and strange mysteries and so forth. Then that's the kind of first hurdle really, because there are it's not a high hurdle to jump, to be honest, because most history is quite interesting depending how you look at it and what you can find out. But in terms of the actual steps, with a game like Call of Cthulhu, there's some very clear kind of bits of information we're going to need, because it's the number one question that players are going to ask their keeper in the middle of a game, like if I enter this country or at this time, can I bring my shotgun? What are the actual laws of the land in terms of what's permissible? What is the travel internally within a particular locale? What are the international travel links? So there's some very basic kind of information in terms of directing research, but more but that's kind of a set thing for every kind of project really. But it really is the same. It's really conducting the research and drawing out historical fact really. What is happening at a social level really, because obviously that's the level where the game is played predominantly. What is happening if the characters enter a particular place? What are the people likely to be, and how are they likely to react? And what's their agenda in terms of what do they need day to day? That is going to provide this kind of backdrop and interaction with the player characters. So it's very much a kind of looking at the social history of particular eras. While the politics is useful to know, it's not really going to impact gameplay, unless you're setting an adventure in a particular, in the governor's mansion or something. But most of the time, there is set in some village or a town. So it's as I say, social history. So the research for that, and as Jason says, it really is a never-ending process, because you find what you think you want to find, and then something else will come out of the woodwork, and it's you've got to kind of be aware of the rabbit holes you can go down, and be prepared to kind of know how far down each of the rabbit holes, because there's always more than one. Are you prepared to go? Because obviously you can waste a lot of time going down dead-ended rabbit holes. And part of this process is obviously working with other people and trying to identify experts or people that have got some knowledge to check over what you've done, to input into it, to sort of say, hey, you completely missed this massive thing that's really relevant that I just wasn't aware of, that we can then look to build in. So it's very kind of make use of the resources you have, but also look beyond those resources to see if you can identify particular experts or sources of information that you wouldn't, you didn't think you would need to start with. But a lot of those kind of become apparent once you actually get your head into a particular, subject area, I guess.
Yeah. And those primary sources, which are so amazing, people that actually were there and wrote about it or lived it, and there is gold, is just the most amazing sort of stuff, and the nuances that are coming from them, which relates to Andrew, on your end, you, and with reacting to the past, because this is a college course, have, I think, different requirements than Jason and Mike do, because this is kind of a game for entertainment. So how's reacting to the past approaching it, and primary sources and things like that?
It's actually just kind of like what Mike was saying. The main thing is you need to have the learning objectives, and then you need to find the experts. And then it's almost kind of actually maybe even a reverse process. So you're coming at it that's content driven rather than play driven. And so you're saying, here's the thing that I have to teach my students. I mean, that's what's in the syllabus, that's what's in the accreditation, that's the assessment. And so from there, you then start building out the environment and the play and the mechanics. And it's really critical that you find the different mechanics that match the emotions that you want. And so a lot of times there's like a really cool mechanic that I might want to have in a game, but it just doesn't fit the narrative, or it doesn't kind of make the setting more enriching. And so you kind of have to shelve and be like, okay, maybe the next one. And then it really kind of comes down to identifying the audience. What is this going to be, a class of freshmen? Is this a class of graduate students? Is this, remedial? Is this honor students? You kind of have to know who you're playing to. And kind of set those expectations of play, and also the time allotted. I mean, a lot of this kind of just comes down to logistics of like the physical space that you're going to be playing in. If you're looking at a typical classroom, what do you have there? What can you use? What environment is it? Where I would say I definitely have an advantage when you say, how long does it take? When I'm working with a faculty member, they will say, on September 5th, we're going to run class from 6 to 9 p.m. And that's how long I have. So if the day before you're not done, you're getting, you have a ship date. And so it's mandatory that it's done then for the class. You then can go into a lot of revisions and iterations. So, you run it in one semester, it goes well, you make a couple changes, you'll run it next semester, you'll make a couple changes. So, I mean, you get more of an iterative design process, which is very beneficial, but it's very, very sequential. So it's clockwork.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, if you guys didn't sort of catch it, that the reacting to the past program in history is more LARPing, because they're role playing it, and a lot of the tabletop games like Call of Cthulhu are theater of the mind tabletop situation. So it's easy to or easier, I guess, to sort of in theater of mind be generating these historical situations as things happen. And it is a great segue too that you guys are mentioned. This is a really tough one, I think, in design. It's related to design, which is playability versus realism. And I look at this as a spectrum all the time in designing, exactly what you said, like how accurate does this need to be, and how playable does it need to be? Because I see a spectrum on this between that and how much in the history we need to go with this. So how do you guys approach that question? How are you looking at it? And I think I will go, let me see if I can get this order right. Let's go Andrew, Jason, Mike again. So I'll just repeat that. Andrew, Jason, Mike.
So that's actually a great question, and it constantly is debated in the reacting to the past community. And kind of where they've settled is make sure that the environment and the players are 100% spot on accurate. So when you're writing a character, it needs to be primary sources. It needs to be as close to 100% accurate as possible. And then let go. Let the players play with it. Let them understand the motivation, let them understand the environment, and let them kind of put their own twist on it. Because otherwise you're just doing a simulation. If you're told that you have to do this, 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 and this, then you're like, well, I guess I'm going to do this, 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 and this. And oh, look, we always get the same perfectly historical accurate outcome. That's not fun. There's no meaningful choices. And so you kind of go, you set it up perfect as possible. You let it go into the classroom environment and it gets ahistorical pretty quick. In my experience, the first time the students play it, they like to push. They like to go, I know you said this, but I'd really like to do this. And they like to just see how much they can bend. And as any good DM will tell you, roll me a 20. Prove it, make it happen. Build that alliance, do that crazy thing, as long as it hits your character's original narrative and motivations. And then the big part of it is the wrap up. So after that play experience, go, well, you did this, but in history, this happened. And it happened because of this, and this, which you did differently, but that's how it played out. So you kind of have to wrap in that history teaching. But you almost kind of have this great hook at that point, because they all do want to know what happened and where they went different and where they succeeded and history failed. And so you're kind of building your audience for that.
Awesome. Yeah. And you guys have it very prescribed, and I think the reacting to the past stuff is really amazing on doing that. Jason, what's your take on the playability and realism end?
Yeah, so first of all, there's a concept that I like to call history panic, which is maybe the opposite of I'm going to go crazy and do something that no Pope would ever do, which is I don't want to do something that's not historical. I don't want to embarrass myself by using a cell phone in the 1930s because I didn't know. My answer to that is to try to make things as relaxed as possible and to encourage people to accept a historical framework, but then let it become what it's going to become, which I think is similar to what Andrew is saying. And as the person who may be most knowledgeable at the table, you just need to calm down and go with it. That's my personal advice and my personal take. When things become ahistoric or whatever, if you're still engaged and you're still having fun, that's great. As a designer, I try to center the history if that makes sense, and I change it where it doesn't. Or where it's going to create a cognitive friction that is just irrelevant. So the Soviets changed the name of the biplanes that the Night Witches flew in 1943, halfway through the game. I'm not going to make a footnote that says change what you call these airplanes, because who cares? I'm going to use the same name throughout, even though that minor detail is ahistorical. The other thing that I want to point out is that sometimes the best solution is to abstract it. So this obviously is completely inappropriate for reacting to the past, but for having fun, sometimes the better solution is to not set your game in Australia, but to set it in space Australia. And that allows you to abstract things in a way that focuses on the important details, but doesn't create situations where players feel a lot of anxiety. I have a game that's about the experiences of combat interpreters in Afghanistan. And it's a game that no one is going to play if I ask you to embody a combat interpreter in Afghanistan. Just no one will do it. It's too fraught. It's too contemporary. It's just too difficult for a variety of social reasons. So by setting my game in space Afghanistan, I provide enough abstraction that you can engage with it. And then afterward, during the debrief or the wrap up, you can map it to contemporary events in a way that's a little more modulated and maybe safer for the participants. So I just wanted to sort of point that out, that it's still a game that's dealing with, in this case, pretty contemporary history, but by abstracting it, I make it easier to engage with the topic.
Awesome. That sounds amazing, sort of thing. Mike,
you'd like it.
Are you? Yeah. Mike, how is Chaosium approaching that, especially with a game that's been around for so long?
Yeah, I mean, I take a very clear view on history, that we can't lie about it. We can't pretend it's not what we would like it to be, because then it's not history. Then it becomes another biased historical text. So I'm very keen to ensure that we present history as clearly, warts and all, because I mean, our game, at the end of the day, games are meant to be fun. That's why they are. Majority of people playing our games are getting together socially to have a fun experience to some degree. So what we try to do is to present history as it is. Warts and all in that respect, but also to provide advice, as in to say, if the subjects of this particular era, setting, whatever it may be, may include some problematic stuff, which could, 1920s, it could be racism, it could be sexism, it could be, a number of isms in that respect that may be problematic for some, if not all, of the people in a particular play group. Is to, we do advise that, to raise that at the start, just like any other kind of safe gaming kind of, advice, to sort of say that is, where is everybody? Do people want to explore this in a historical reality, in the sense that, do they want to, be exposed to those kind of problematic kind of aspects of a particular setting? As part of the actual game, they want to explore them, or do they not? Do they, is this a more of a fun kind of version of the game, where the history kind of takes a back seat to what the characters are doing, and history is just the setting in that regard. And it is a continuum, it is a stream, and different groups will play their games along that kind of continuum at different stages at different times. But our job is to not to hide things and to suggest things that weren't, that are. But equally, we want to shine a light on history that's not always that well known, or has been has been kind of hidden to somewhat. So in Down Darker Trails about the Old West, we wanted to make sure that there was sections about representation about women in the Old West. They weren't all just school teachers or farmers' wives. There were female soldiers and cowhands and all sorts. And likewise, ensuring that there were a representation of different kind of ethnic groups, African Americans, and so forth. That sometimes, if you only get your history from Hollywood films of the 20th century, you have a particularly skewed view on history. So we want to make sure that we kind of broaden it as possible.
You mean Tom Cruise didn't cover all of history?
Well, indeed. So yeah, I mean, we just want to be accurate and not hide things, and say that end of the day, people, whether they're living today or 2,000 years ago, we all still have the same issues and problems to face, and history teaches us this, and so we don't want to shy away from that. But equally, it is a game, and we try and put the context into the hands of the players themselves by saying, here is the information, use it as you will, based on your preferences as a play group. But obviously, in a game like Call of Cthulhu, the history is the setting and backdrop. It doesn't often form the actual heart of the actual player engagement in terms of the story. It can do, but 9 out of 10 times, there'll be some sort of haunted house or whatever it is that exists in this setting. That's where actually the players are focused. So it's trying to find the right balance, as ever with anything really. It's trying to find the right balance. And in terms of advice to people, in terms of historical authenticity, is to say, if you make a mistake, that's fine. It is a game. Just try and be consistent. And particularly, there are many players out there who are well versed in history, probably more than the GM. Who will turn around and say, "Oh, you got that wrong." I say, "Well, that's fine. Just you tell me. You know more. Tell the group what we got. What we should know, and put the onus on the player. If the player is an actual expert, then let the player help to inform the group and use it as a learning experience to some degree." So yeah, I mean, it's just kind of common sense stuff, really. But just trying to empower people to take what they will. To ensure that they all, everyone has an enjoyable and safe kind of gaming experience.
Yeah, great. That's a great way of going about it, because that's what this is that people are having fun. and want to do that, whatever that group is. So, and we touched on a little bit, thank you guys for touching on the question, because I wanted to get to the audience Q&A in our time remaining. So you guys did touch a little bit on, like I said, sort of the ugly aspects of history that aren't as palatable. And I think you guys addressed that. So if anybody has more questions about that, go ahead and ask. So I do have a couple questions coming in. Thank you very much. You guys can put in the chat, or there's a little Q&A function. So I got some. The first one's from Jeff. Hi, Jeff. This is probably going to go for Andrew mainly, because this is a specific thing. But how do you assess the student experience? What's the grading? How would you be assessing reacting to the past?
So the first thing is, it's almost like day one orientation to reacting. You have to say that winning isn't equal to an A. You have to disassociate grades from winning, because there are some easy wins, and there are some characters that you'll play that you're not gonna, win all of your objectives. And so you kind of have to go, we're not here to make sure that you win history. And so you kind of have that disconnect. And ideally, it's through the same assessment model that anyone else uses. So if your department likes multiple choice or essay questions, or your anything else, the real value in this is letting your students take that same assessment. That way you can compare the two, because one of the things you don't want to be like, oh, everybody played a great game, everybody gets an A. You really want to have that same kind of almost research based, where I can go, look, you gave 103 hours worth of PowerPoint lectures, and your students averaged 73% on this multiple choice exam. I want to be able to go, look, I had, the same 103 hours, but we did it through play, and I averaged 78% on this exact same exam. And then you can kind of show and go, look, I'm meeting all the same learning objectives. Some games and some classes allow for a little bit more. Like I've had instructors in speech class use the Democratic National Convention in 1968, where the vast majority of gameplay is given through speeches. And they're like, oh, well, here's a persuasive speech. Here's an informative speech. Here's an impromptu speech. And they're just giving those in a different setting. So it makes it real easy. So it's not like everybody show up on Wednesday and listen to 23 persuasive speeches. It's through the arc of the narrative of the story. Everyone's going to give a persuasion speech.
Yeah. There's a method in the reacting to the past to doing it, and by that Chicago 68, I play tested it. It was amazing. And if anyone is ever in class and you play Hunter Thompson, that was me. Thank me for making sure that Hunter Thompson was at the Chicago 68 convention. So we have another question from Lily. And I guess this will go to, let's go Jason, Mike, Andrew on this. We got about 5 minutes. I think we might go over a little bit because we started late. Josh, tell me if it's okay if we go over late a little bit. So Lily asks, when replaying well-known historical event, what is the furthest you have strayed from real history? So how far have you gone afield from a real well-known historical event? And I actually will say, if anybody has an answer, jump in on this. I won't call on you. So anybody's got an answer, go for it. Andrew?
I was gonna say, I'm almost gonna opt out of this one because we don't get too far. I have seen in Chicago, Mayor Daley end up on the ticket for the Democrats, which that's pretty far, but also the person playing him was very outgoing, and the other individuals that were playing were very timid, and that just allowed Mayor Daley to steamroll the whole convention.
I think for me, in terms of important historical events, I try to keep the real historical events the same, and I don't try to change those. I use the word backdrop a lot. That a real historical event may be the backdrop to a particular game event. I don't want to change the historical event because that happened, and I don't want to detract from that or reinterpret that necessarily in terms of the actual information I provide. I may, so let's just say something, a scenario is set at the Democratic Convention in '68. I'm not going to change necessarily what happened there, but the game may be set in the convention with all the low-level kind of political types and the machinations going on there, because they're not going to actually necessarily affect the outcome, but it's going to be fun to play with that kind of backdrop going on, or the Hindenburg exploding in a ball of flame. I'm not going to change the fact that Hindenburg does that, but you may be on the Hindenburg before it explodes and you've got to get off. It's an inevitable event. So you kind of build in a timeline that way. So I try to keep history, but let the play around in the background or the forefront of it, I guess, is the way I would look at that.
Jason, do you have something?
Yeah, I mean, I've played a lot of weird games where time travelers beat up the Manson family, or things like that. So I think it's a matter of setting expectations as a group, right? If you're playing some kind of gonzo crazy situation where everything's on the table, then you can delight in derailing history. But in a lot of the games that we're talking about here, and certainly in the games that I'm designing, there's a pretty concrete framework. Like World War II is going to end in May of 1945 in Europe, and it's not going to end sooner because you're a hero. It's not going to end later because you fail at something. So yeah, I largely agree with what Mike said about that.
Cool. Thank you, guys. So we do have one question, and then I'll ask for any wrap-ups. So we can go over a couple more minutes. So I got one question from Jason that'll go to all of you. And then if anybody else has any more questions, go ahead and ask. Jason says, Jason Morningstar mentioned chunking as part of your initial design process. Are there any other preferred tools all of you guys, use to make your lives easier? So what tools are you using to make it easier? We're talking about chunking it.
And I was using that not as a term of art, but just as a description of, sorting the text into pieces. How you do that there's lots of ways to do that.
So I've always been a fan of the quick, rapid prototyping. Get something playable, get it quick, and try it out. Because there's how I think it's going to play, and then how the class is going to play it. And so you work with the faculty to get that in the classroom. And usually you'll ask like, hey, what's your good class? Like where do you have the good rapport with students? Where are you ahead a week where you could take a day and let them be the beta testers for this? And that always, usually the students like it, the faculty like it, and they like the fact that it's still a little rough around the edges. It's the Post-it notes and index cards and dice and chips and, $4 worth of supplies from the dollar store. So it's rough around the edges, but I think they appreciate that. And then you ask them the feedback, and I would love to see almost knowledge gained through game design process. We kind of hit a little bit of it on the questions, but I get students they want to know more about the history because they want to help design this. And they'd be like, oh, what if we did this? And you'd be like, well, does it work? And then they'd go off and kind of research that to justify a new mechanic.
It would be awesome to have a legion of graduate students that are helping you write your games. They research
100%. I totally recommend it. If you can get a university to hang out with you while you're designing, do it.
Awesome. Mike, do you have something to add on this?
I mean, to be honest, I didn't hear what Jason said about chunking originally, but it sounds to me exactly kind of similar to what I do. Chunk out in kind of broad strokes. If I'm looking at a particular section of history, chunk out the different kind of key aspects of that, and then pick the ones I'm going to focus down on, and the ones where I'm going to be doing further research to really get down into the kind of nuts and bolts detail that is required for the game setting or adventure that I'm writing in that way. But yeah, chunking certainly is something I do a lot in that sense. Yeah.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone. It looks like we've answered all our questions. So I want to thank everyone for joining us, especially the panelists, Andrew Peterson, Jason Morningstar, Mike Mason. I want to thank all of you guys for joining us for the webinar, or if you're watching this in the future. Please check out thegameacademy.org. Check out the rest of our events going on today. Thegameacademy.org/fundraiser, all one word. And you can see a schedule of events. We've got games, we've got other panels, we've got a silent auction. We have a Twitch a program that we're launching called Arcane Dinner Party, where you will learn cooking. You will learn a recipe, a very easy recipe, as well as watching a Dungeons & Dragons game. So again, want to thank all of you for joining us. Check out the rest of the stuff at the Game Academy. Stay safe, everyone, and take care. I am stopping the recording. Boop. Stop recording.